First, I'm very excited for the chance to present this in front of you, and it reflects on some of the work that we were talking about this morning and then continuing through. And so I'll also just encourage you to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's what we need for a little bit of boost this afternoon. But if you're not uncomfortable, at least at some point throughout this session, then I'm not doing my job, okay? So we'll go ahead and put the slides up here. Make sure that you know that you're coming into the right session here, and very, very happy for the chance to see. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a few activities. These are activities I do with educators and coaches and teams to have us get a sense of how we make decisions, and particularly talking about discipline decisions, but we won't quite get into that quite yet. And then I want to make sure to spend about half the time talking about what to do about it. So this is going to be a practical session. You're going to learn a strategy. Okay, so we're going to do a little warm-up activity here. And what I'd like you to tell me with your hands, how many people believe that the color of these squares are the same? That this color right here is exactly the same as that color? Got a couple people, mostly. I like it. I like the skepticism. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to take your left thumb, and I'd like you to hold it out in front of you. I know that this is my right thumb. Don't worry, I was an aerobics instructor in a previous life. And I want you to cover this space right here. And everybody's got a little bit of a different sized thumb and a different length of arm, so it may take a little bit. Anybody? Forget it. I'm just going to give you a giant thumb. All right. Anybody want to change their mind? Closer, but not exactly the same? This one's just a little darker than this one? All right. How about this? I'm going to tell you that they are not only almost the same, they are identical. They are the exact same color. And I'm going to show you in two different ways. Number one is here is a rectangle, same color at the top, same color at the bottom, right? I look like a magician, right? Okay, I'm just going to slide it over. And it just sort of blends into nothing. Whoa, interesting, right? So this is a very, very complicated optical illusion. And some of the things that you're seeing here are designed to trick you into thinking that they are different colors, but they are, in fact, the exact same color. So you've got this horizon line right here. You've got shadows. You have this amazing, conference center carpeting here, that looks really, really good. Everything is trying to fool you into thinking that it's not and taking away from this very obvious decision between are the colors the same. So let me take away all of the extraneous information. You can see it right here. Same color. Kind of neat. And this is a lesson, not to show that your original thought was wrong, but rather that when our brains are trying to make really difficult decisions, we are looking for all sorts of information around it to help make the right decision. And sometimes the information around it is not correct and leads us down a different path, okay? So our first reaction might not be the right one depending on all that information around it. And that tells us that context matters, right? And that's what Dr. Fox was talking about before, too. So we're going to do another activity. This is an activity kind of based on what's called the implicit association test, or sometimes known as the IAT. Anybody heard of or taken the IAT before? I see maybe a couple nods. Okay, so a few people out there. It's not one test. It's actually a family of about a dozen tests. And they come from Harvard. You can go online and take them. Don't take it right now, but maybe afterwards. It is taken online on a computer, and you're actually tapping keys, and it's testing some reaction time that you have. And you take it 5 times, and there's sort of different trials of it, or different rounds of it. So we're going to do a little bit of a mock-up of that together. Here's an actual picture of an actual IAT. This is a picture looking at a test of association between gender identity and majors at university. Okay. So anyhow, we're going to do one. We're going to do one called the Gender Career IAT. And the Gender Career IAT is going to test the strength, or whether you even have a connection, of men with careers, meaning work outside the home, and women with more family roles, okay? So we do not have computers in front of us. We are going to use our knees in front of us. And so this is what it's going to look like. And I'm going to ask you to join along with. We're going to do 3 rounds. So please have nothing in your lap. Uncross your legs. You should have both feet flat on the floor. Nothing in your hands. So I'm going to ask you to be tapping your knees to do this. So what you're going to get is you're going to get a word right in the middle of the screen. And that word in this first round is going to be either related to career or related to family. And if it's related to career, I want you to tap your left knee, okay? That side over there. And if it's family, I want you to tap your right knee. Okay, make sense? Okay, we're going to do a little practice, and then we're going to do it kind of for real. Okay, so first word here. Marriage. Okay, so I see people, first of all, good job, because you're actually following along. Right side, that is family related. Maybe there's a marriage and family counselor here, but most of the time we're going to be putting it on that side. So there's a little bit of learning history, right? Okay. Supervisor. Okay, you're tapping your left knee on that one. Not making any judgments about your family life, but that all sounds right. Okay, children. This one might be a little tricky for some of us. Okay. Yeah, I see some people trying to cheat it and hit both. You're not allowed to hit both. You can only hit one. I love the creativity, though. I love the creativity. Which one is more? That's going to be on the right side, even though maybe you only work with children and don't actually have any of your own, so you don't think about it that way. Okay, salary. Okay, I see that left side. Great. So we're going to do this practice without the arrows. Marriage. Supervisor. Okay, I love the work you're doing. Children. Salary. Okay, and this is also kind of like mid-afternoon, so you might be a little tired. Okay, so what we're going to do for real is you're going to get 1 a second. If you get it wrong, don't worry about it. Just try to catch right back up, okay? You good with that? Okay, and don't feel bad about it. Just like get right back on that horse. Okay, I did not know this, but the #1 most dangerous animal in Australia is horse. That is what I was told by a ranger yesterday, 2 days ago. So you've got beef with a ranger somewhere else. We'll talk through that. Okay. So anyhow, 3, 2, I'll talk with you afterwards. Okay. 3, 2, 1, and go. All right, how'd that feel? How'd that feel? All right? Okay? Got the hang of it? Great. Okay, now I'm going to make it a little harder. Okay, so #1, I'm going to switch so that you do this on the real test, so we're going to practice it the other way around so you don't get stuck in one direction or the other. So now family is going to be on the left side and career is going to be on the right, okay? And I'm going to add another level of classification. You are going to get common European, American, Australian first names, okay? And they're going to be either male or female. You're not going to get Pat. You're not going to get Leslie. You're going to get like legit. Leslie is at least a male name in Canada, so anyhow. So you're going to get one right here. And it's going to be one word. So you're not trying to classify both. If it's a family career one, then you're just going to do that side. If it's a female male, you're just going to do that side. Make sense? It's probably going to make more sense when you actually do it. OK. So we're going to practice one more time. OK. Jeffrey. OK, right? Male first name, right? OK, so we got that. OK. Julia. Julia, we're seeing that. Left side. OK. Corporation. OK, now that's on the right side. I saw that happen. Excellent. And wedding. Left side. Oh, you are all good at this. So we'll do it without all the arrows. Julia. OK. Jeffrey. Corporation. Excellent. Wedding. All right. Feel all right? Ready to go? And go. That's all right. All right. I love the passion. That's fantastic. Sometimes people just refuse to do it. When I tell people you can't tap both at the same time, they get angry and they say, I'm going to rebel. So anyhow, I love it. OK, we're going to do one more round. Don't worry, I'm not going to add another category. All I'm going to do is move career back to the left and family over to the right. OK? Everything else about it is exactly the same. OK, we'll do a little practice. And Ben. OK, right side. Excellent. Emily. Left side, you were doing great at this. Children. Yeah. Oh, tricky one, huh? OK, and then salary over on that side over there. So do it without the arrows in a slightly different order. Children. Doing this slow for you. Ben. OK. Yeah, it's OK if you get it wrong. Don't worry about it. Just get back on that horse. Whether or not it's dangerous. OK. And salary. OK. All right. Are you ready? And go. Let's keep going. Get on the horse. OK. How many people are happy there's not a round 4? All right. What I would like you to do is I would like you to talk with the person next to you. If you'd like, you can do it on your own. But I'd like you to answer these questions. First one is, what was the hardest one for you? Round 1, round 2, or round 3? And why do you think that is? And then if you have a little extra time, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to chat about it. How might the way that you actually, or that people tap their knees on this be related to real world interactions? You've got 3 minutes and go. Right, so what you're describing, I'm going to do this the fast way to make sure that we get through some of it. The third one is called the stereotype incongruent example. The second one is a stereotype congruent. So if you felt like first one, you're like, OK, what is this guy doing? I don't understand this, but OK, I'm going along, it's fine. And then the second one, a lot of times people feel like they get into a groove and they're like, oh, I got this. This is super easy. I can totally do it. And then the third one, it's like, wait, what do I do? And sometimes you've got to be suppressing your first reaction so that you can do your other one. And it is just like me driving down our streets here, right? What's the first thing I'm thinking? I should be driving on the right side, right? All of those things, exactly. So this is one of our most common ways that we go into discussing this idea called implicit bias, okay? And implicit bias is not the only driver of inequitable outcomes, but it's a really interesting one, and it's one that we find as a good entry point in. So implicit bias is a little bit different than what most people think when they think of the word bias. A lot of times when we think of bias, we think of, I am going to treat that person consciously differently because of something about them, some group they're part of, or some way they act, or something like that, and I'm doing it consciously. Implicit bias is a little bit different in that it is unconscious or automatic, meaning it's not quite front in our heads when it's happening. It's something that happens just below our level of consciousness of it. It might be our first thing we think of. Interestingly enough, some researchers have looked, so there are things called, there's implicit bias, explicit bias, and overt bias. And those things are actually not very strongly related to each other, which I have found really surprising. Meaning you could, just because you've got really high implicit bias doesn't mean you also have high explicit bias and vice versa. It's kind of fascinating. Also, generally not an indication of our beliefs and values. So sometimes I'll ask people like, I'll ask you all here, just because we'll do it fast. How many people believe that in this day and age in 2024, any person identifying as woman or man should be able to choose any career or home, family role they want? Believe they should. Not necessarily can, but should. Okay, keep your hand up if that is like maybe a core value for you, like something that like drives your, yeah. So did anybody we're going to get real here. Did anybody feel a little bad about how they did, that they couldn't do as well on the third one as on the second one? Maybe, maybe not. That's all right. Okay. So remember, it's not necessarily your stated and held and even core values that it's related to. We all have implicit biases, even if we're affected by them. So interestingly enough, that one that we just took, if you take it for real, 75% of men hold a strong male career association. 80% of women hold that strong male career association, interestingly enough. Okay, where do they come from? Well, they're based on stereotypes. They're based on incomplete experiences. They're based on media representations, usually not direct, I've had that experience, and so I can speak from experience about that. And interestingly, implicit biases don't affect all of our decisions equally. They're more likely to affect quick decisions that we've got to make really fast, like every second, and decisions that are ambiguous, where it's a little bit unclear which way to go. Think about those shades of gray that I showed you before. So sometimes I'll show some examples of implicit bias. I'm going to show a couple on here. I'm going to show you some pictures. I'm going to ask you if you have any implicit biases about anybody in here, okay? What do you think? Anybody have any stereotypes that are popping in their head? Maybe, maybe not, right? So I identify with two of these. I am both Canadian and American, and then my heritage is Scottish. But I've decided that Canadian-American, the motto for Canadian-Americans is sorry, not sorry. So I have that. Anyhow, if you didn't get that, that's okay. I'll explain it to you later when we talk about horses. Okay. All right, anybody have any implicit biases? If you see anything up here, don't share with your neighbor, all right? Okay, so that test that we just did, tapping your knees, when you take it on the computer, it's actually very strongly related to real outcomes that we see out there in the world. It predicts the extent to which arbitrators, so judges, determine fault in labor grievances, determines teachers of students with autism, their levels of professional burnout, the extent to which police officers use force when arresting Black or African American children as opposed to white children. This is in the US. Actually, all of these examples are in the US. And this one's a little painful to see, the extent to which pediatricians recommend less pain medication for Black children than white children with identical symptoms. Okay, that tapping of the screen here. One of the scholars who I have followed and has really influenced my work, her name is Beverly Daniel Tatum. She's written a lot of books. She was a dean of, president of Spelman University. And she describes racism, so implicit racial bias, as like smog. It's all around us. We can't escape it. It affects all of us negatively, although some of us more than others. And it's not based on one individual decision that one person makes. Like, we don't have air pollution because one person decided to drive on their own today instead of take the bus. It's collective decisions that happen over and over again. Another quotation, this is from the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who's a U.S. civil rights leader. This quotation from him: "There's nothing more painful to me than to be walking down the street, hear footsteps, and start thinking about robbery, and then turn around and see somebody white and feel relieved." So even this leader in the U.S. civil rights movement is still talking about his implicit biases that he has. And those implicit biases we have might be related to disparate outcomes that we have. So here's an example, and some of you might be very familiar with this. Some of you might be a little less familiar. So these are rates of supervision of young people by jurisdiction. And so what you can see is this is rate per 10,000, so it's correcting for a number in the population. You can see youth who are indigenous is in the blue bar, and non-indigenous youth is in the orange bar. Oh yeah, supervision would be, basically like probation, being watched, having been arrested, and so on. Yeah, so painful stuff, right? Here is where we're going to move from here, and this is one of my favorite people, Dr. Rosemary Allen, who's a colleague of mine, a colleague of Mary Louise Hemeter, if anybody saw her here. She is fond of saying, if you're aware, you're halfway there. So just being aware of our biases is already helping us out a little bit. And I'm going to give an example, and I'm going to do this the fast way because it's an American example, and whether you like it or not, it's going to be hard to tell. But National Basketball Association, some researchers looked at National Basketball Association referee bias and whether there was racial bias in referees' calls, okay? And what they found, these researchers found, yes, there were biases, but it was a little different than they were expecting. They were what were called in-group biases, meaning that white referees were more likely to call fouls on black players, and black referees were more likely to call fouls on white players. What they decided to do is institute an intervention. And this intervention is something called instant replay or video replay. And what they did is they took this and they put it on steroids. And this is a giant warehouse in the state of New Jersey where every single basketball game from every angle is being played. And this command center is actually talking to the referees, telling them what the call they should be making. And they also give them a printout of every single call that they make and whether it was the right call or the wrong call, performance feedback. And guess what? Those researchers came back and found that the racial bias in calls disappeared entirely. So if you've got $10 billion, I know how to fix it in education, right? Okay, so we're going to start getting a little bit more close into some of the decisions that we make, and we're going to talk specifically about discipline decisions. So when I talk about discipline decisions, I'm talking about removing a student from their peers in a classroom, sending them to the office, or removing them from school, suspending or expelling students. And there's this old view of bias that says, we've got racial biases, and that's related to disproportionate discipline. And although that is partially true, the good news is a more modern view says, yes, even though this is true, it depends on the situation in which we as decision makers are making those decisions. So there's a really interesting book about biases and decision making by Daniel Kahneman. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he talks about, even though it's been around for years, this dual systems processing theory. And what it says is anytime we're going to make a decision, there's two ways we can do it. System one, which is fast decisions. So this is like if you've ever had a decision where you had to make a decision and you already like kind of decided it without even having consciously thought about it. That's fast decisions, system one right there. Anybody play like a musical instrument? Not a musical group here. That's okay. That's all right. We can be vulnerable with each other. And so anything where we don't have to think about it, we just do it, that's going to be our fast decisions. A little bit like me driving, right? Okay, system two is slow decisions. These are ones where we've got a little bit of time to be able to think through our decisions and say, like, would this actually help or would this hurt? Would this make things worse? Would they make things better? And so these are deliberate decisions. And the research says if you've got more than 5 seconds to make a decision, it can be a system 2 one, as long as you catch yourself and go avoid your knee-jerk response or your initial response in there. And so I'm going to ask you to take a look at the screen here. I've got some common decisions that we as teachers make. And I'm going to ask you to think about, even though any decision might be fast or slow, depending on the situation, take a look here. You can either do it on your own or you can do it with a partner next to you. Think about which ones do you think might be more likely to be fast decisions, in the moment, snap decisions, and which ones might be thought through. So just take a minute. Okay. So if you're playing along with the home game, although any of them could be fast or slow, in general, these ones on the left might be more likely to be fast. The ones on the right might be more likely to be slow. And yes, I know each of us has been hanging out at 11 o'clock at night doing some grading, and you can turn it into a fast decision very, very quickly, but we're not going to talk about that right now. What we are going to talk about is a thing called a vulnerable decision point. So I'm going to give you a little bit of nerdy words this afternoon. And so we call this a VDP. A VDP is a specific decision. In this case, we're talking about discipline, but it could be anything where we are more susceptible to our implicit biases than other situations. Okay? And there's 2 parts that can make this a decision point, a vulnerable decision point. One is elements of the situation itself. So anybody familiar with the game Cluedo? We call it Clue in Canada, but that's all right. Okay. So it was this person in the study with the lead pipe, and so on. We can actually look through your discipline data and find those specific ones, and I can show you the example. But then there's also how we're feeling in the moment, right? I'm exhausted. It's the end of a long day. I'm at the end of my rope. I'm thinking about something else I've got to deal with, right? I just had a bad interaction with a parent, and now I'm back in here, and I'm trying to figure all of those things out, and I'm not quite in my space. That would be that decision state. We also can identify through data things called equitable decision points. And these are discipline decisions where actually we don't see any disparities in the outcomes. Students are being treated fairly across. So there's a few ways that we can identify these VDPs. And I'm going to just go through this quickly so I can show you a couple of examples from national data, and then we're going to talk a little bit about personal ones as well. So remember that game of Cluedo. These are the most common VDPs in US schools, meaning these scenarios have the most racial disparities than any others. Number 1, defiance in the classroom in the afternoon. Okay, so I want you to be thinking for a little bit, what's going on in that situation? Number 2 is defiance in the classroom in the morning. And then number 3 is actually physical aggression on the playground in the middle of the day. Number 4 is actually defiance in the classroom in the middle of the day. So that one's a top one. Anybody care to guess what might be going on in these situations? Yeah, so defiance is what we would sometimes call a subjectively defined one, right? It's socially constructed. What level is engagement and chatting with and engaging with my teacher versus I'm standing up and I'm not going to do this blank, 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 right? And there's some line in there, and probably the most extreme ones we would all agree on, but then some of those other ones, the needle is a little bit different. Yeah, so defiance, disruption, and disrespect, we call those the 3 Ds because we see the most disparities in that. The 4th D is actually dress code, but you all are a little bit different, so you don't necessarily have that problem here. But my daughter would hate going to school in Australia, I'll tell you that. Okay, great. Okay, so the other thing I was talking about is decision states, and there's this sort of funky research called resource depletion, which says that sometimes when we get tired, our decision making can falter a little bit. When we are hungry, we often make decisions that are a little bit more biased. Some research actually call this this effect where we actually make more ethical decisions in the morning, called the morning morality effect. It's kind of interesting, right? It also describes how I, personally, can stay on my diet all day long, and then when my kids go to bed and my wife goes to bed, then I'm just standing at the refrigerator, like shoving food in my mouth, right? I got all the way through the day, and I got tired. Some research out there, this will scare you probably more than anything else you've seen this week. This evidence-based practice of hand washing in hospitals will drop almost 10% over the course of a shift, regardless of when that shift is taking place. Toward the end of a shift, hospital workers wash their hands less. Okay. So I want you to think for a moment here about what do you think might be some times for educators where you might be a little bit more vulnerable, where your biases might kick in, your knee-jerk reaction might pop up instead of your thoughtful one. What do you think? And so one of the things that I think is very helpful is you might be talking about overall situations, but each of us have our own personal VDPs as well. What are our triggers that really get us and we snap instead of respond thoughtfully or calmly? So you can actually reflect on your own in here and actually come up with these. So Russell did a great job of keying up this antecedent behavior consequence line here. We can actually think about that. We can think of that as our behavior as teachers of sending a student out of my classroom, or our behavior as principals of suspending a kid from school. And so being thoughtful about what those are for us in particular is really useful. But now I want to spend the time thinking about, okay, what do we do? We've identified that biases exist, and we all have them. We can figure out when they're going to happen. What are we going to do in place of that? So for the early educators in the room, I really love this quotation. When little people are overwhelmed by big emotions, it's our job to share our calm, not to join their chaos. Okay? If you're more of a secondary person, this is my other line, is don't fight fire with fire. That is not an evidence-based practice. The evidence-based practice is water. So how do we respond calmly? And that is through something we call a neutralizing routine. So a neutralizing routine is an instructional response that we've practiced, that we're ready to use instead of our fast response, our type 1, system 1 response, especially during those VDPs. And so what these do is they allow us to pause, and we can respond constructively in a way that's really effective. And there is some research on what makes a really good neutralizing routine, and it's a little bit like our school-wide expectations or school-wide values in the sense that it's not like here's the exact one that you absolutely need to use, but instead, what are some of the characteristics? I'm going to describe those. Number one, they're if-then statements. If I see this behavior, then I'm going to do that. Okay? They are brief, right? They're fast. There are clear steps to them. I feel like I can do it, and it's something that slows down my response time, so it interrupts this chain of events. Some things that neutralizing routines are not. It's not something that we are passive parts of, right? That's done to us. It's not an easier way to exclude students that's not as bad. And it's not something that's really, really long to do. It's something that we want to catch up and get back in the game, right? So action you can do, keep students involved in instruction, something quick, and then right back continuing with instruction. So I'm going to talk about a few examples of those in the time we got. So basically, when you see unwanted behavior, you can stop and ask yourself, hey, is this one of those VDPs that we were talking about? Either based on our school data or what I was thinking in terms of how I was feeling in the moment, right? My decision state. And then if so, you're going to use this neutralizing routine. So it can look like this. So here is me, my teaching behavior, right? And so what this says is if I haven't had a lot of positive interactions with students and I am tired, right? It's the end of my work day, right? And a student makes loud complaints about work, which is that subjective behavior, right? I could either view it as constructive criticism about my level of differentiation of instruction, or it's defiance, right? And if it's defiance, you're out of my room, and then I don't have to deal with you. You're out of here, but it makes things worse and makes it more likely to happen next time. So what we want to do is create a little bit of space in between that student behavior and my response. I can ask myself, hey, is this one of those vulnerable decision points that we're talking about? Then if so, I'm going to use one that I've done in practice. And here's one example of one that instead of sending the student out, I can just calmly say, hey, see me at the next break, and then walk away, and I'm calming myself. Student sees that something's going on, but they're still in instruction. So we're trying to break that chain. And you might not like that one, or you might not think that that one is going to work. And that's okay, because here's a whole page of possible neutralizing routines. And they fit into a few categories. And I'm going to show you about a dozen of them. And you're going to think that 11 of them are totally silly. And one of them you might be willing to try. And so do that one, okay? But they fit into a few different categories here. Number one is we stop or we slow ourselves down. Okay, so that one that I showed, see me after class or see me at the next break. You can do the mental jujitsu of asking the student to reflect on their behavior. At the same time, it's like, oh my God, calm myself down, right? Or just say, can I make this decision right now? Or do I need to say, I'm going to need to come back to this? That would be all right too. Second category is a reframe of the situation. So there's lots of possibilities of things that we might fit in here. One of my favorites, though, is one that a participant in a workshop shared with me. And she said, anytime I see behavior that really annoys me, that really gets my goat, what I do is I respond, instead of being annoyed, I just respond as if they're physically injured. So I say, oh my gosh, are you okay? How can I help? And it's a total change in the response that happens, right? Or we've got the other one of take care of yourself, right? Use your oxygen mask before putting it on others. So you might have a breathing routine, you might have a mindfulness practice that you use, or you might have a social emotional learning program where you've got a reset strategy that you've used, a down-regulating strategy. And so I'm going to share with you a video of one here, and then you can decide. And you can also look and you can think, do you have any implicit biases about somebody who has arm sleeves? And then do you have any implicit biases about somebody who has arm sleeves that are entirely Disney characters? But that's Audra here. So here she goes. I'm going to get the audio up.
Guess what? We all have times where we get frustrated or come into the classroom after having a bad morning or even day. But the lovely part is that there's something called neutralizing routines that we could develop during times when we aren't feeling frustrated to utilize during those times when we get stuck. An example of a neutralizing routine that I developed for my classroom is an if-then statement. My if-then statement stated that if students are talking back, then I need to take a few breaths before I engage with those students. This neutralizing routine was actually so effective, I decided to teach it to my students. And we developed something called try. When my students are feeling stuck during a challenging moment, they just need to try. Take 3 deep breaths, reflect on their feelings, and remember that they got this and you got this too.
I hope that you have learned a little bit and that you can think about some kind of neutralizing routine that you might use or have used or more might think about sharing with the people with whom you work. And have a lovely afternoon. Cans is calling out to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. But thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time today.